Hello, and welcome to Insightful Conversations with your host, Three Principles practitioner, Adey-Jones. Join her each week as she welcomes some of the world's leading Three Principles teachers and practitioners who share how this understanding has dramatically improved the quality of their lives and the lives of those they work with.
I'm very excited to have Dr. Keith Blevins with us. Dr. Keith Blevins is a second licensed psychologist to meet Sydney Banks. Keith was mentored by Sydney for the next 32 years until his death in 2009. During this period of time, Keith became an international leader in the Three Principles. He served on the faculty of 9 universities and worked as a psychologist in large neuropsychiatric hospitals, trauma centers, and private clinics. He was also the director of psychological services at Baylor University. Before Sydney Banks' passing, he charged Keith with writing a unique book that would include the collection of Sydney's last writings, which they turned into a long interview between the both of them. Also, in this yet-to-be-released book, there will be several new select transcriptions by Keith of Sydney's talks. Hi, Keith. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. I'm so delighted to be here and to talk with you.
Oh, lovely. So I like to go back to the beginning. So tell us how you first came across Sydney, the principles, and all those years ago.
That's an ancient history sort of time. I had heard about Sydney Banks, and it intrigued me that he had found something that was communicable and important, and it had to do with psychology. And I was interested in it. I was living in the Bay Area, San Francisco, and my wife and I decided to go up. He was going to give one of his first seminars, and when I introduced myself to him, he said the most curious thing. He says, "We've been waiting for you," and I said, "Well," it puzzled me because I thought, "You don't know anything about me. What do you mean you've been waiting for me?" But he meant that he had this experience, and it had taken a while for it to be translatable or to be realizable by other people. He told us then that it took 10 months before the first person heard what he was talking about. And so he had this profound experience wherein he discovered the three principles of psychological mental life. And he was talking about and sharing this knowledge, but he was in a small community, and when the first person really picked it up, he told us, another person said, "Wow, I don't know what you've got, but I want it." Mm-hmm. And so it became replicable, and that. By the time I heard about this, it had really spread to a larger group of people, and so someone had suggested to Sid. He was very kind of unworldly in a way. This was the mid '70s in British Columbia on an island, and someone said, "Well, you could do a seminar," and he said, "What's a seminar?" He had no idea. When it first happened to him, he didn't even know how to spell psychology. Oh. And he had realized the three principles of psychology, which is a remarkable thing if you consider it. Like, mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting? It didn't come, these three principles didn't come from an academic institution or whatever. I didn't even know at the time. I was one of the very first psychologists, maybe the second actual psychologist that met him, and he didn't even he didn't know anything about the field, which I did, of course. I had my doctorate, but he was talking very profoundly, and it really struck both my wife and I, and we really found ourselves uh, moved, and it was interesting that he talked to a very small group, well, maybe 100 people, and many of them were people that had been listening to him for a while that were on the island. But then there were a smattering of us professionals from off island, and both my wife and I noticed that we began to experience meditation. We had learned about meditation years before, but there's a certain sort of kind of an experience of meditation, a sort of relaxation, a kind of a body hum, and a sort of um, quiet-mindedness. And we began to experience that as he was talking, and we'd never had that happen to us before in our lifetime. And we just got really moved and changed by meeting him that first time, and every time thereafter. So he became a mentor and a friend for 32 years until he died in 2009. But I want to go back to just to underline the fact that I think something, whatever happened to him, I don't know what it was, but whatever it was, um, he realized something of great importance for humanity. And actually, then thereafter, many years kind of ensued, and I began to explore, well, what are the principles of psychology? I was a psychologist, but I didn't even know that there could have been principles. Then I found that there weren't principles in psychology, and that the father of psychology, William James, had said, we don't have psychology as yet to find her first principles. And he said that in 1890. And which I realized, yeah, because my whole study of psychology wasn't framed by principles. It was framed by history, historical ideas, many different types of methods and therapies. And so there were no organizing, underlying principles. And that began to intrigue me. And I realized, my gosh, this is what Sid is really talking about. And he's found something happened to him in that experience. And then later on, I just this morning, actually, I was listening to an old recording of his, and he mentions that that evolution doesn't really happen through time. That evolution happens through a conscious development. So he said this, and I wrote it down because I thought we might discuss it, and here it is right in front of me, so I'll read it. The evolution of humankind is when his conscious state rises. It's not through time.
Yeah.
Everything that has been given to this universe, brand new, has evolved through a superconscious state, which appears via mankind. It's like the electric light bulb. The first person to ever even consider the thought of electricity or the electric light bulb, you can rest assured that didn't come from his mind. Take all the geniuses from the past, and they will tell you it was not from their mind. They will tell you they don't know what it is, but it was just an insight, because you see, you've taken something that is totally unknown to the world and manifested it. Where did it come from? It's the unknown being manifested. So it must literally come from the original mind. And that powerful experience that happened to him suddenly, kind of without warning, or without even, as he often described it, without even willpower, or it wasn't like it just occurred to him. And he was as mystified by it as the rest of us were. Yeah. But the profundity of it stuck with him, and it continued to impact him the rest of his life. And when he said, when the original mind shows it, the mind of mankind simply builds it. So I think the building of these principles, which William James had predicted and did not know what they were. William James was an incredibly incisive, a wise person, known as the father of American psychology. And he said, we don't have principles. But he said, when physics got principles through Galileo, or when chemistry got principles through Lavoisier, that was the beginning of the science. Before that, it was just conjecture and wild ideas, which is, and I've since found resources that say that's the field of psychology today, right now, is just scores of methods and ideas, because these principles have not yet been found out. And that's where we come in, or our wanting to share these principles is our privilege. But what does the world know about them? Still, this was 1973 that he had this realization. So many years have passed, and still they're very unknown, or relatively, almost completely unknown. Or maybe that I should say it that way. So.
So how was it for you as a psychologist back then to have this experience and see what you saw for yourself, and then take it back into the world of psychology? What was that like for you back then?
It was slow going. It was inch by inch, realization by realization. I could tell that he knew so many things, and just intuitively would point them up. I remember one of the first things was he was curious about why we would talk about the past, for example. And I thought, well, my gosh, I've never heard anyone even ask me that question. It was just presumed. Every session would pertain to the past, and every problem seemed to have its roots in the past, and he was quizzical and puzzled as to why we would even bother with that really had nothing to do with it. And there were somebody asked my wife once, in one word, how would you describe the experience of meeting Sid Banks? And she paused for a moment, and she said, confrontational. Oh, wow. And I think that might be a pretty good one word description, would be confrontational. It was there were tons of assumptions and beliefs and concepts and judgments and ideas that I had been trained in, and all of my colleagues had been trained in, and everyone in the whole field had been trained in, and thought they were important and relevant and pertained. And Sid, just whatever happened to him, blew those out. And one of the things he said early on, I remember him saying, it's not, it doesn't matter what you think, you're wrong. And
that's pretty cool.
Well, that pretty well summates the whole thing. And there was the way in which he knew, he had a discernment about things that were not relevant to our functioning and what was. And that was what I call the red line. And so we were constantly being confronted by what we had that that we thought was relevant that wasn't. And that was a lot of the experience of interacting with him was to be uh, shown through our own um, through our own fumbling around and making mistakes, what we were doing that was unimportant or irrelevant, and what was relevant. He knew what was relevant to mental life, and he knew what wasn't, and we didn't know that line.
Yeah.
And in a large way, that's still what's happening with us, with our students and with our public, is discerning that line and communicating it and confronting it, because there's a lot that human beings think about that they think is really relevant, that's completely um, has nothing to do with the truth of mental life. It's just man-made ideas and concepts and beliefs and such, and all of which have to be transcended
Mm-hmm.
for us to have a new level. And he knew that, and he still does. So anyone who wants to hear someone who knows about that other side of the line, I would recommend they listen to anything they could ever listen to by Sidney Banks,
Mm.
or read anything that he's written.
Yeah, and that brings me to this project that you were asked to do by Sid before he passed away. He asked you to explain about that, what this upcoming book that you're working on.
Yes, yes. Well, he surprised me because he had received a diagnosis that I wasn't aware of. That very few people were cancer, and the doctor told him. Well, he called Valda and I in December of 2008 and said, I've been diagnosed, and I will. The doctor tells me I will die in 2009, and he died in May of the year. So he said he thanked me for uh, my my work through the years, and he said, I want to give you my last writings, which was an overwhelming gift to me and to us. And he said, and I've written this, I've written a lot of it out. So um, I'll send it to you. And then we went back and forth about it over the next few weeks and months. And we decided to turn it into an interview. And so, that was unique for him because he hadn't really had um, the opportunity to really express himself with a live questioner. So I was sort of the student, and he was sharing things with me, and I found it to be really, really powerful and important. And I think it has a lot of uh, the text has a lot of things that people will be extremely interested in.
Mm.
Again, these confrontations,
Mm.
these the bevy of beliefs that we have that that innocently busy our mind. And my wife, who is co-authoring this with me, said once, if you it's a lot easier to know something when you know something is irrelevant. It's a lot easier to not pay any further attention to it in your mind.
Mm.
And I didn't know, because Sid would talk about the quieter mind, but I didn't realize that the only way to get it quiet would be to have insights about what's busying it up,
Mhm. Mm.
and what's so that the principles are kind of like a big subtraction of irrelevancies, many of which are completely dictating behavior today. And so by having those, excuse me, dismissed, then a quieter mind would necessarily ensue. When I started thinking of it and saw it that way, my mind got a lot quieter, even still, after having been mentored by Sid for many, many years. Those were powerful insights, and they still are. They're still surfacing daily, things that I thought were important and pertinent and relevant that aren't so, and they're being shown to me insightfully, and they're being dropped. Is one of the ways, one of the phrases he used to describe that. So, and I think anyone who comes to understand the principles has that moment of insight wherein they realize, oh, my experience really is thought in the moment, and that thought principle allows us to recognize the illusion of separation between the spiritual and the physical. And so when we have an insight, all these illusions that we have believed in about that false separation are shown to be an illusion and an irrelevancy. And when that happens, there's a load lifted, and our mind quiets, and that's mental health. So he said, you're only a thought away from mental health or mental distress. And you can see why now. You could just, as you engage in a level of thinking that is not relevant or not pertinent to the truth of life, you kind of pay for it. And as you don't do that, you get a burden is lifted.
Yeah.
So the simplicity of the principles was really important. And again, this is such an important point in history. William James said, if these principles were ever discovered, and he said one day they surely will, that it would mean more to the welfare of humanity than anything technologically we've been able to do in human history since fire.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I personally was in therapy myself for about 30 years. And I have to say, it definitely helped me. It definitely helped me. But I could just see how stuck I was too. It helped me get to this level, but it didn't take me any further. And even within my coaching, I also noticed with my clients, I could make them feel better for the time that they were with me. But I also knew that I wasn't really giving them, I felt that we were just swimming together in this thing, and I didn't know how to really help them. And when I came across the principles, that's when for me, it was like, oh my God, this is the answer. This is how people can, achieve mental well-being. This is that key to get out of the mire of staying in our, perceived problems and past and whatever it was that was, taking so much bandwidth in our thinking. So it really is. I mean, to me, it's been phenomenal. And I see also with my clients too.
Yeah, me too. I think those results are so. You're onto something, something radically important, systemically important, or that would wipe out years of misunderstanding in a single insight.
Yeah,
That's and that everyone. I mean, if everyone knew that, the cleanup could begin in terms of, like we talk about environmental cleanup, but I think the real cleanup job is our mind. And we don't know how to sort it out. we don't have a good sorter, you might say. So we sort according to a false sorter, and we don't really get very far. And the evolution of humanity overall, as Sid often commented on, is really, he says, we're still fighting wars and creating wars and starvation and all these mental problems. We're doing, we've been doing for thousands of years. We haven't, there's something's missing, and he called these principles the missing link. And when that link is made for you or for any of your clients, and you've really given them something that they can use as prevention.
Yeah.
And you use it as prevention and healing too. So do I.
Yeah. It's like when I came across the principles, and I adored my therapist. I mean, he was amazing. He was a really lovely, lovely man. But it really became clear to me, I'm just going in there and indulging my thinking. It's just, I don't need to do this anymore.
Right.
I really don't. And it was just done. I mean, all that years and years spent on, and when you said about the sort of the sorting, it was like I had this sort of cave with these, piles of this, piles of that, piles of whatever, and just like rearranging the piles. But once I came across the principles, it's like I could just sweep all that out of there.
Yeah.
It's not even important anymore. I don't need to organize and sort why I feel a certain way.
Right. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, and again, that's the simplicity, isn't it? And the calm, and you find something really profound that it's less tempting to keep all those piles, or you can really see what that they're not the point.
Yeah. And that leaves so much space for new stuff to come in.
Yeah.
New insight, new wisdom, creativity.
Yeah, exactly. And you actually see, oh, that doesn't that doesn't pertain, or that doesn't matter, or never mind myself. Like, I think people, when they get something stuck in their craw, they think it can often give them a real emotional experience, those thoughts. And it's hard to know. It can be hard to discern, oh, this is one that needs to be thrown out. It looks really, not having a good sorter, we're really rather susceptible and vulnerable to thinking that we don't notice. We kind of welcome it in. We don't really realize that it's harmful to us or irrelevant. So if you've got a good sorter, then you're really gaining a lot of ground.
Yeah. Well, I am so excited about this new book. When do you think it's going to be out?
Well, we've had to kind of grow into it, I guess. I would say, we've been very, we wanted to be conscientious about the value of this message, and do as good a job as we think we can do to offer this, the importance of these principles to the public, with as little confusion as we could hopefully not perpetrate upon the public. So we're taking our time. We've been we're working on it most every day, and we're putting things in there that we think, there's a sort of like signposts or certain pertinent huge categories of irrelevant thinking that Sid summarily would dismiss, and we're trying to organize it as regards to that, so that the reader would be able to get a real get the real welfare and benefit of the practicality of the benefit of the principles for their own experience. So we've taken our time and we're still working on it. So I don't have a publication date.
Yeah.
I don't even have a title yet, but we're working on it.
Well, in the meantime, we're coming to our end here, but you have some wonderful videos on your website, and you do explain the practicalities of the principles really, really well over that series of 10 videos. So I highly recommend people, in the meantime, waiting for the book, go to your website and listen to your talks on that. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's such a pleasure. I wish I had more time with you.
Oh, me too.
Okay.
But it's been. Thank you so much for your interest and publication of this effort. This is the sort of thing I feel very fortunate to share, and it's nice. It's nice that you feel the same way, and you've taken this step to do this in this way. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Me too. It's like it's had such an impact on my life. You just can't help but want to share it with others. It just it's just been incredible. So, and thank you for all the work that you've done over the years too.
Oh, well, thank you, and thank the public for listening in and seeing, just checking it out. See if you can't find something really, really important for you.
Sounds beautiful. Okay, I hope to see you soon.
Okay, Dale. Hope to see you too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.